All right, welcome back to the Order of Chaos podcast. Today, my guest is Mitch Horowitz. We're going to be talking about his new book, Esoterika. Mitch, thank you very much for being on the show.
Pleasure, my man. Good to be back with you.
Yeah, same. Real quick, before we get into the actual interview, I do have a couple announcements that I want to make. Actually, really just one, and that is that the Order of Chaos Witchcraft Certification Program is finally here. It's open. We're doing it. The first two lessons are already posted, and this is the official certification program that goes along with my book, which will be released in October. So if you are interested in learning the complete system of chaos witchcraft, then please join us at the Order of Chaos Occult University. Links will be in the description. All right, Mitch, dude, your book is so good.
Thank you.
It's
Thank you, my man.
Listen, when I say that, I'm gonna try and I try not to fanboy when I talk to you, but I got into occultism when I was 15 years old, and it is so rare to find an author, a teacher, a person talking about this stuff with the honesty and integrity that you have. And I've found that to be something I struggle with ever since I was 15. Even so, like the first book of occult philosophy I ever read was the Satanic Bible. And
Mhm.
even then I thought like there's some stuff in here that seems like it's just kind of aimed at the kind of teenage angst, it's playing into that. And to me, I have this really high standard for what I consider to be honesty, right?
Mhm.
And that's
Mhm.
to not pander, and it's just to really be yourself.
Mhm.
So all I'm trying to say is that when I read your works, that's all I get. I'm like, this guy is just
Appreciate it.
saying exactly what he thinks. And I think that that's rare. I also really appreciate that you do not spend the first 100 pages of your book talking about how great you are, like so many occult authors love to do. You just get right into it. And finally, that your new book, Esoterica, which is I love the title too, Formulas Against the False Self.
Appreciate it.
That's right at what to me, magic, what I call magic, what lots of people call magic, or what some people call manifestation, what you've called selection, this thing that we're all kind of talking about is to me all about personal transformation. And that's what your book is all about.
Yeah, I first of all, thank you very much, and thank you for recognizing that effort. Part of the book has as its purpose, part of the reason I wrote the book was to encourage, hopefully by example, fuller transparency among spiritual communicators.
Yeah.
I think it's very important that the reader, the co-seeker, the viewer not be left with the misimpression that the person communicating somehow occupies a different echelon from
Mhm.
he or she, because it's not true. It's not true.
No.
And I don't need to school my readers. They need to school me in some respects. And I'm sharing ideas with them. I'm sharing suggestions with them, born of experience, born of long time study, born of long time spiritual search. And we can work with these things together. And I do my best to represent my failures to them as much as my successes. And that raises a different but related point, which is that I absolutely reject shying away from plain language and the use of terms like failure and success and wish and sorrow and happiness, because I firmly believe that the sensitive, mature individual, including adolescence, is perfectly capable of defining those things with maturity and coherence and airtightness. They know what these things mean in the same way that a thirsty person knows what it means to slake his or her thirst. And the process by which those concepts are taken away from us, usually through the roundabout reasoning of airsat's seriousness. Which I is saying that? What do you mean by that? Happiness is just a barrier to the work, which I got a gold star for saying many, many years ago in a different facet of my life. I know where those gold stars come from, and I reject them. I reject them. Keep the gold stars, because what those gold stars do, and this process of pseudo seriousness that belabors the search is subtly steals the individual's question. And my wish in that book is to restore to centrality the individual's question, which may, in fact, as you were alluding, invoke or involve a change of conditions to better reflect this self expressiveness, broadly defined, of the individual. And I want to abet that process.
Man, that is so spot on. And you articulate it so well.
Thank you.
There's this thing that happens, which is, if anyone who's familiar with Buddhist philosophy or Zen philosophy is pretty familiar with, once you define something or it's defined for you, you stop wondering what it is. Right. Like
Mm-hmm.
you see a bird, someone says that's a bird. Okay, that's a bird, that's a bird. And then you no longer register. You don't wonder what is this? What else could it be? And we do
Mm-hmm.
that with our emotions to a degree that is so toxic because we have this label for what is joy, what is happiness, what does that look like, what is it supposed to be? And then when you don't attain it exactly the way that you thought it was supposed to be, you feel that you failed or that something has gone wrong, rather than just exploring the full gambit of human experience and emotion. And something that I think really led me to this search in the first place was the realization that I don't shy away from a lot of negativity or darkness or what other people might not call favorable experience. I put so much value in those experiences. I don't want to avoid them at all. I love that I'm a person that learns everything the hard way because the hard way is more fun, in my opinion. Or
Mm-hmm.
like there's more value to it, there's more weight to it, you know?
It's the only way. Otherwise, I'm just reading a book about hiking rather than hiking. I'm looking at a trail map. I'm reading a recipe. Which is what we often do.
Mhm.
The recitation of these formulas from Bartlett's Divine Book of Quotations, which is always at the ready, it amounts to reading a recipe to satisfy one's hunger, or even worse, having a recipe read to me. And the recipe, should it exist, may also change. It may work once and may not work a second time. That it occurred the first time is significant. It's reality, it's substantial. But these paradoxes beset us on the path and they have to be accepted. I think that a key element of good functioning, happiness, maturity on the path is the capacity to accept paradox. And that will come and kick my ass when I think I have some foolproof plan to repeat something. Suddenly my foolproof plan doesn't work. Maybe it was Heraclitus who said nature likes to hide. Well, magic likes to hide. And we have to contend with that as well.
That is very, very true. That's a really good point because magic can work wonders the first time you do a particular spell, and you can do the same spell the second time and get no results. And one of the most interesting things about that to me is that the expectation that was set up by the first time ruins the second time. You had success, and so you
Yeah.
developed an expectation. Now that expectation has blocked your success in your spell
Right.
work. And so, magic is so incredibly nuanced in the way that you use your mind. And that's what I think you're kind of really tackling with so many of the topics of your book is it's how to use your mind, right? It's what I have a short segment in my book called Mind Control where I go over some of these similar topics, but it's just a little blurb. But you got, a whole book about how to use your mind in a way that is more beneficial to you than maybe what you've been handed so far. And then, that's something that I thought about a lot while reading your book is God, we're just told how to think and how to feel and how to live and how to be. And it blocks us from exploring that on our own. And that, so, let me get to my first real question about the book. What is the false self?
As I see it, the false self is the self that has internalized peer pressure so that we are unable, even within the exquisitely private confines of our own psyche, which I see as a compact of intellect and emotion, even within those private confines of our own psyche, we are incapable of enunciating a wish without immediately qualifying it with terms that we have imbibed, received through repetition, sometimes through translation of translation of translation of ancient literature, the originals of which are unavailable to us in the language in which they were set down, the originals of which may be lost, as is the case with the philosophical Hermetic literature, the Corpus Hermeticum, and whatever tradition or whatever channel or subject from which familiarity reaches us, we have an unverified embrace of certain concepts so that we begin to perfume even our own ideas. If I have a wish to achieve or accomplish something, somehow I have to add this dollop about meaning, that dollop about service, this wrinkle about who and how I want to help someone. And if that's all true, if that's sincere, then bravo. But a lot of the time, that's a kind of conditioning that is simply internalized peer pressure, internalized iterations of, I heard it somewhere, and it stops functioning from the self, from the psyche that has produced the wish, the psyche that has produced this feeling to express itself, to know itself, to find its way within the schema of creation, as above, so below. And so the false self is that which is so subject to unverified ideas, outside peer pressure, I heard it somewhere, points of view, in idiom, inherited or imbibed from subcultures, increasingly from online culture, that we become strangers to ourselves and don't recognize a wish sometimes even when it arrives, even when it reaches us. It falls to every generation, it falls to every individual within every generation to verify things, not as some rhetorical device that somebody offers us with the real intent being that, well, go away. And when you verified exactly the same thing that I believe, come back. And if you come back and you haven't verified it, go away again and come back when you have, which is very often what is meant when that term is used by rote and without real intent. I try to reintroduce that term with real intent. Verify. That's the greatest hammer against the false self.
Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, then you're saying the false self is the self-perception that we build out of the opinions, expectations, assertions of its influence. It's the personification we build out of the influence of others.
I would say that's right. It may not be that in totality.
Right.
It may be an admixture, but there's an influence. There's a fencing off
Mm-hmm.
and a internal dialogue that may be very, very heavily influenced by what you were just describing.
Yeah, and so you're mentioning something that I think about a lot, which is, when we think about our desires. Okay, and so one thing I used to do when I would interview potential students for my occult university, I want to know what their goals are, right? I want to
Mm-hmm.
know how I can best help them. And so I would ask them, if I could just hand you my magic wand and you could, whatever you want, what would it be? And then so frequently people don't have an answer. They have an
Oh, they have an
inability.
answer. They just don't want to tell you, or
Well,
themselves more than that.
yeah, themselves, exactly, right? So the thing is that they
Oh,
struggle to
yeah.
say I want without immediately feeling shame, guilt, attachment to this, that, and the other thing, or I don't deserve this, and so they can't get the words out. Right? I see them choke up, and
It's beautiful.
that's the thing we have to break apart. It's like this.
Yeah.
It's like the treasure is buried, and that's the dirt that's on top of it.
If what you said is just a perfect portrait of the false self, that student is coming to you with unmet needs. That student is coming to you with a search for power, a word that we don't like using because we think it connotes corruption or force, and
Hmm.
that's obviously not how I use it. We talk about the use of power to revolve turbines. There's nothing corrupt about that. It's some sort of agency, some kind of capacity to see through one's plans in a world that's also filled with countervailing forces. And in extreme
Hmm.
cases, those forces might disrupt or complicate or condition my plans, and that has to be understood too. But I'm trying to marshal a sense of agency and power. There's an unmet need, and so is the student. They're not just randomly thinking, "Gee, I think I'll take a course on practical occultism." They're there for a reason, and yet you ask them their wish, and they're tongue-tied. They're embarrassed. They have it,
Hmm.
but they're embarrassed within, and I understand that because I'm in the same boat. And I use a not dissimilar exercise where I try to say to other people or to myself, imagine that the proverbial genie was ready to grant you your one wish, but on the simple condition that you had to be 100% frank about what it is, or you'd lose everything.
Right. Yeah,
What
I
is
loved that
it?
section of the
And
book.
there's a terror in the individual to enunciate that wish. And that
Hmm.
terror is not without some foundation insofar as people might be rightly wary. If I don't condition this, it could be trouble. And I sympathize with that. I condition wishes all the time
Yeah.
because there's things I will not do, and there's gains I will not accept under certain circumstances, let's say. And I do that recognizing that conditioning the wish will likely slow its arrival. If things are reaching us through established channels or familiar channels, or in some cases, radically unfamiliar channels, however they're reaching us,
Hmm.
they probably won't reach us in the mind's eye way that I'm holding things or arranging things. And conditioning, arguably, does slow arrival. If you're looking for a certain partner and you place certain conditions on that, that's going to restrict or limit channels of arrival. And that may be fine. That may be fine. But just be aware of it. And and none of that should deter self honesty, sincerity. And we very often move in the direction of what we want emotionally because we're ruled by the emotions. If that weren't true, there would be no outbursts of rage. There would be no untoward anger or emotions that I spill all over everyone. Bodily urges as well. There would be no addictions.
Right.
And so the intellect is the weakest of that schema. And we're likely to move in the direction of our wishes under any circumstance, whether they're acknowledged or articulated or not. And I'm touched by that story because I can see myself in it. I probably would have come up with some snappy answer several years ago, but I don't want a snappy answer. I want a real answer, at least to self. And it can be private. A person might say, well, look, a certain degree of disclosure is necessary for the exchange. But in Esoterica, my stuff is usually in private because I don't want other people to steal that person's wish, for example. I know you wouldn't do that. You're
Right.
asking as seeker to seeker in an
Yeah.
exchange. I'm talking about out there in ordinary life.
Yeah, that's a good point. So, okay, can you elaborate when you say steal a wish? What do you mean exactly?
Oh, sure. I
Yeah.
mean, look, there is such a terrible hostility that runs through life. One sees it run riot on social media where it is most naked and most exposed. But social media didn't alter human nature, it just amplifies very often the worst traits of human nature: the sarcasm, the rhetorical questioning, the hatefulness, the self centeredness, the self positioning, and so forth. None of that got invented by social,
No.
but the algorithm really amplifies it horribly.
It is
But
tuned into the shadow of humanity in a way that is actually like profoundly cool if you think about it. But it's also horrifying, but it's
It's horrifying.
interesting. It's horrifying, but it's like, how did they extract the shadow of the entire culture and put it on display? Because that, to me, that's what the internet
Well,
is.
it seems to me most of the time the individual on social media is the individual in anxiety. There's comparison going on, there's attacks going on, there's worry going on. Do I
Mhm.
get my likes or what have you? I ask everyone, I suggest this to everyone as much as to myself. When you're on social media, stop from time to time. You'll forget it most all the time, but once in a while you'll remember. Observe your emotions. The likelihood is they're not euphoria, um, they're not pensiveness, they are anxiety based. And so social and the algorithm really plays off of our anxiety. In any case, none of this was invented yesterday by the algorithm. It's intrinsic to human nature. And if you share your wishes with another person, there's an overwhelming likelihood that they will dilute what you're saying, that they will take what you're saying and run it down or subject it to know nothing rhetorical questions or something of that nature. Maybe because it taps into some jealousy in them, maybe because of
Mhm.
nothing particularly complex. There's just hostility within human nature. I see it all the time. People like to self position. They do that a lot through throwing rocks at other people, vastly more so on social than around a table. But nonetheless, be precious with your wishes. Be precious with your ideas. Think about it. We really discuss things in order to dilute them. We go to shrinks or we talk things over,
Mhm.
problems over with friends with the wish of diluting those things. And that has a place. That
Oh,
has a place. But it ain't for nothing that the great occult revivalist Eliphas Levi counseled silence, silence, silence. There's good reason for that.
I get it. Okay, so that's that's very cool. So what you're saying is that, so for example, talk therapy is effective because the more you talk about something, the less power it has over you. You're getting it
Sometimes.
out of you. Yeah, well,
Sometimes.
ideally, yeah, ideally. Um, and so the thing, if we want to diminish its power, talk, talk, talk. If we want to retain its power, zip it.
I believe so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a really powerful insight. That's very, very cool. And it makes a lot of sense. And you can see it. You can see it with people who move that way through the world. They don't talk about what they're doing. They do it and you see it. And it's like, whoa, this is really cool. They've been working on it for years and you've never heard of it. Right. They've waited till
That
exactly the right
is
moment.
absolutely true. And it's very tough for people like me, and it's tough for all of us in the social media age
Yeah.
because we want that immediate gratification. Look
Yeah.
at this shiny, neat, cool thing that I'm doing. But what was it Levi wrote? To know, to will, to keep silent. He really understood that. I quote a passage in the book where or maybe this is Impractical Magic. Bob Dylan says much the same thing. He said he was asked in an interview with the show 60 Minutes, how did you know that you were headed in this direction? And he said, I knew it from a very, very young age. And it's kind of this destiny thing. And you shouldn't talk about it very much when you know it because other people are going to destroy it. And you just need to keep it within. And Dylan could have been updating Eliphas Levi.
Yeah. So that works perfectly with the way that I view what's going on here, right? So what's happening in the world and the way that I try to talk about these things with my students is that, you're we're always kind of looking for what psychic powers, right? Psychic powers. And to me, your thoughts, your feelings, your words, those are your psychic powers, right? It's that you exert psychic force 100% of the time, all the time, and you're doing it either intentionally or unintentionally, and either with very weak sort of conviction or very powerful conviction, and that's entirely up to you. So the people who are determined and can follow along with some of these principles of, like, maybe don't talk too much about it so that you don't burst your bubble, um or so it's not stolen from you or diminished by others, is that you're cultivating that psychic force within yourself to be unleashed at the correct time. And so what the world is, in many ways, I mean, the world is many things, but one of the things that the world is this game of who can cultivate that force the most, right? Because like you said, other people intentionally or unintentionally are working with or against you. It's just the nature of it, right? One
Mhm.
person wants to build a park, and one person wants to build a mall on the same plot of land, right? And there's so many factors that go into that, right? But one of those factors is the psychic force that can be cultivated by either individual, and how much desire, how much will can they put into this wish that they have to build either the park or the mall.
I think that's true. And it's remarkable to me how fail to, I fail to abide by, say, the power of concentration, which can be broadly understood. We wave air currents out of our hands, but an air current concentrated can have the force of a bullet. Likewise, water. Concentration in nature is what provides power. Concentration provides power in the individual as a psychical force, and also as a physical or intellectual force. Why does the
Right.
martial artist, why does the ballerina repeat routines over and over and over to the point where they become second nature to one's body? By dint of drilling and repetition and training, rehearsing, the intellect is trained. For the
Mhm.
actor, the emotions are trained. For the athlete, the body is trained. All of these things are getting trained. And that goal, that all of that drilling is directed towards concentration. So how there's be no reason to consider the psychical an exception to any of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. So I know you already touched on this, but I wanted to ask in chapter 7, you posited the question, what is power? Right. So
Yeah.
what is power, Mitch?
Well, I'm going to answer that first with a quick story and then with a very direct reply. We have to face facts in our world, and I don't make demarcations between the so-called visible and the invisible world. Um, to some extent, as above, so below, the great law of correspondences that reaches us in various forms from Hermetic tradition is quite similar, say, to the yin yang of life. And I think it's artifice to foster lines of demarcation between the world that we can see or cannot see. Where
Right.
does one end and the other begin? Where would essence end and personality begin, or higher end and lower begin, and so forth and so on? So in our world, power is very often money, first and foremost, sexuality, security, depending on your situations.
Hmm.
One of those things is going to determine the power that you wield over another person. And anybody who denies that knows very little about power, I can promise you. I was in a situation several years ago where there was a big audio publishing company that owed me royalties. And for whatever reason, they were late in paying these royalties. And I'm a working artist. I need the money for the same reasons that everybody
Yeah.
else does. Same reasons that the person not paying me the royalties needs his weekly or biweekly paycheck. And man, you really know what power is when you don't have it. I
Yes.
had no strings to pull, no way of influencing this large company to do the right thing, to keep its word institutionally, to honor the contract that I had signed. Look at this lovely piece of paper. You have to do what this says. I have no power to make them do that. So I sat around like all the other schnooks who weren't getting paid, and eventually I did. So if you don't have power in terms that I've just described it, you're going to experience a paucity of that wish in the world. Sometimes. And even if you have all that stuff, you're going to experience a paucity of your wish in the world. I've seen people who have some of that stuff and they're car gets a flat tire on a lonely road somewhere where there's no cell phone service and they fall to pieces. You may as well be dealing with a 3-year-old. And we're all going to be in that situation. But here's the bottom line. As far as those of us who are interested in cultivating power in the world, which I certainly am, power is relationship. And I want people to really live with that. If you think of those periods of time where you felt consciously right and good and seen, consider that that's a result of relationship. Whatever setting you were in at that time, that was the right setting. You are in that spot of power, of happiness that could be described metaphorically. But in fact, I think that in that instance, the golden mean, the holy grail, the philosopher's stone is relationship. And when you're in wrong relationship, you will never feel powerful.
Yeah.
You will feel constantly beleaguered and troubled, and all of the energy that could be directed towards your efforts in the world will be depleted just dealing with that misplacement of relationship. A houseplant cannot function without water, cannot function in the wrong kind of light or what have you. We are the same way. And the things that we want to work on in ourselves, the things that we want to work on in outer life, none of that is possible when we are misplaced. When we are in right relationship, which we know by a feeling of rightness, relaxation of the right kind, comfort, awareness, exchange, you feel it. You feel it. And when you don't feel it, it's trouble, and you must get away from that trouble, and it's not your fault. It's not your fault. There, you will rediscover yourself when you're in right relationship. When you are in relationship where you feel seen and acknowledged and appreciated, and there's some sort of simpatico that we refer to metaphorically. We might call it energy. I'm not sure what this energy is in the way that we discuss it. I mean, Mesmer called it animal magnetism. Perhaps he was exactly right. It's all just metaphor. It's all
Yeah.
just metaphor, but it's real. It's real.
Yeah.
And I could come up with innumerable instances where I experienced that energy the way you, the way your audience have all experienced that energy. And my teacher told a story that's in the book. I think it's in the book. Yeah. When he was a very young man, he was involved with the Hare Krishna order. And the founder of that order, Swami Prabhupada, he felt was a realized man. And I had never otherwise heard him use that term. And they had a little headquarters, it's still there, on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. And they hadn't a stitch of furniture inside. And at the time, the Swami gave him a sacred Hindu text. And since there was no furniture inside and there was no place to put the book down, he rested it by the door on top of his shoes without realizing that that's a great sacrilege within Hindu tradition where shoes are considered to be very profane. And Swami Prabhupada got very angry at him and he said, I can see you do not know how to handle a sacred book, so give that book to me back to me at once. And my teacher, of course, complied. And he said to me, I did believe, and I do believe this was a realized man, but I also knew that this man could not be my teacher because he could not see me. I would never disrespect a sacred book, never. And he could not see me. So that teacher-student relationship was not possible. He left and became involved with the Gurdjieff work, which many, many years later is where I encountered him, one of the great gifts of my life. And so there's just an example. It doesn't mean that measuring, evaluating right relationship is necessarily saying that the other guy is wrong or the other guy is bad, but it does recognize the soil that you need to be in.
Yeah, it's when you find, I like to talk like things in terms of frequency. When you find, when you're just on the right wavelength with somebody, it doesn't mean that if you get off vibes from a person doesn't mean they're bad or negative or an evil person, which is what so many people seem to assume once they get into kind of spiritual concepts. And they're like, trust your intuition, absolutely. But you could have off vibes with somebody, and that's a perfectly lovely person. You're just not compatible,
Yeah.
right?
And listen, there are sons of bitches out there,
Oh yeah,
so I don't shy from that in the book.
yeah.
Uh, Anybody, who wants bluntness will have a good time reading this book. There are sons of
Yes.
bitches out there. And when people are possessed of coarse emotions and you are a sensitive person, you can get nowhere with that person. And my suggestion is get away as
Yeah.
quickly as possible and don't look back and don't engage in theatricality. Nobody needs to be confronted. If you confront the world will just make you a victim one more time. We all know how the world does this. You're too sensitive. I was only joking. Well, just logically, I was saying, fuck that. Your point is you're not engaged in theater. And when you're in the wrong soil, unlike the house plant, you can move and you must.
Now, when you say you're not engaged in theater, I love that. But I also think that a great many people are engaged in theater, and that's just how they operate. And this is one of the things that I really struggle with in terms of certain people who I just don't get along with, but like family members that I cannot see eye to eye with them. And to me, it's one of the reasons for that is that I see that everything they do, like everything about who they are, seems to be a attempt to be seen by others as something that they are not, and I cannot vibe with that. It's like I see your mask, but I'm not trying to talk to your mask. I'm not interested in the costume that you're wearing. I want to talk to the person, but it's impossible because that's it's all they have is it's like everything is performance.
It is impossible. Gurdjieff referred to it as a buffer. And if someone does something that is contradictory to his or her self-image, and I ask that people listen to this very, very carefully. If a person does something violative of his or her self-image, that impression does not reach that person and cannot reach that person. We cannot sustain self-contradiction. So if a person who thinks of himself as honest should commit an act of theft, just hypothetically, and you have incontrovertible evidence that they've committed that act of theft, like a videotape, for example,
Yeah.
listen to me, they will deny it.
Yeah.
You can see from their facial features and their idiom, it does not reach them. It's not quite that they're lying per se. It's a buffer. It's something different. It's not like anything. It does not penetrate. It does not reach that person. And that is sleep. I reference sleep and automaticity in the book.
Yep.
That is a part of our sleep. Anything I do that violates my sense of self, even if confronted with the plainest of evidence and facts, you will see from my facial expressions that it's not entering, like something not heard or seen or smelled.
Yep.
That's as real as it gets. That
Yep.
must not be forgotten and it must not be translated into other words.
Yes, I completely agree. And you can see this happening with people all the time. And that brings me to another quote of yours that I really loved from the book, because I think that it is the solution to this. And we spoke about this on the last podcast also, but you phrased it in this book as, I'm going to paraphrase, I'm not sure if I get it exactly right, but it's, do you seek truth or do you seek happiness? Right. To me, truth is peace. And so that's what I'm after. I'm after peace. And to me, that requires absolute honesty, because I don't want to carry a bunch of lies. I don't want to carry the weight of dishonesty or the weight of any of that. And so that's why I prescribe to a policy of radical honesty. But if you don't do that, I'm not saying it's the only way. It's the only way for me, but whatever. But if what you're seeking is a feeling, let's say happiness instead, then everything that you do and say will be in service of seeking that feeling.
Mhm.
I don't think that that's a way to live that will lead you to that feeling. Honestly, I don't think it will.
Well, they can both be the same thing. The search for meaning, the search for truth, the search for happiness can, of course,
Well, yeah, of course.
be the same thing.
Yeah.
I think in that chapter, what I was driving at is not to create a cleavage, but to ask myself to be really honest and forthright. I think that when we enter a search, it behooves us, of course, and we will get asked, if not from within, then from without, what do you want? What are you looking for? And people will say meaning, truth, peace, etc. And if that's true, then I'm first in line to shake the hand of whomever is stating that. But I really want to be sure that that's true because it's not true for me. I'm not trying to say that in some provocative or ridiculously chin out way. I'm trying to say that my search is for self expression, broadly defined, but also very, very specific. If we take seriously the dictum embodied in law of correspondences, it stands to reason that as we were created, so do we wish to create.
Mhm.
And we wish those creations sometimes to be seen and to have a constituency and to have an audience, without which they may wither. An idea without a constituency certainly withers. And one may argue with that, and I sustain that argument. I accept that argument. But the truth is, if you want an idea to function within the world as a policy, as a psychology, as a spiritual system, well, we don't have Christ, but we have Christianity. We don't have Buddha, but we have Buddhism. We don't have the Vedic families of India, but we have Vedism. So there's going to be a descending octave in which these things are experienced in the world, and that descending octave reaches a constituency. So I guess what I'm trying to get across is I just want to be frank with myself. I just want to be honest with myself. I don't want to tell someone that my search is a search for truth or for peace if it's really a search to find resources in the world, which is legitimate. I'm not going to judge what somebody wants because what that person wants may not only have tremendous value to him or her, but may benefit concentric circles of other people about whom I know nothing. And so that chapter is really just in the service of saying, can I be frank with myself?
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And I think that, again, that just, if you can be honest with yourself about what your desires are, then you can pursue them without all the baggage. Right. I heard something yesterday, and I don't know who this quote is from, but it like pierced my heart. And I messaged my friend Ivy to tell her right away because we have similar ways of thinking. Um, and you might know who this quote's from, in fact, but I don't because I was in that state of like half awake, in between being awake and being asleep when I heard it, which is like the ideal state for so many
Hypnagogia.
things, for things to
Yeah.
get you, right?
Mhm.
And the statement was the key not only to financial success, but to joy and happiness in life is to do exactly what you want to do, exactly the way that you want to do it.
Mhm. Oh, that was Lord John Pentland, who was the founder of the Gurdjieff Fork here in America. He didn't put it
Okay.
in exactly that way, and he was adapting it himself from a book called The Seven Laws of Money by Michael Phillips. I
Mhm.
think Lord Pentland, whose wording was different, but it's in the book, was
Okay, so I
more
was falling
elegant.
asleep listening to the audiobook, and that's how it got because I was kind of,
Boom,
where do
that's
I
it.
hear this? It was
Yeah,
actually okay.
yeah.
Oh
That
my
that
gosh. Okay, that man, that really got me.
It's a fascinating statement,
Mm.
and it must be lived with. It must be lived with. He would talk about how rich people think passively, and again, one mustn't get overly literalist with any of this, but one
Right.
also mustn't translate it into, in other words, which is where ideas go to die. He chose his words for a reason, and just live with them. There may be a certain question of passivity, a certain question of receiving, doing what you want as you wish to do it. It's very hard.
Yeah.
It's very hard. I don't know what it means. I mean, I'm sure there'd be somebody who's happy to explain to me what it means, and I don't want that explanation. I'm not interested in a, in other words, translation of an esoteric idea. I'm interested in living with it. And passivity is very hard for me. We're in a passive current of life, but my approach tends to be more activity, more assertion. And that may be anathema to what I really need. Maybe passivity is a flexibility. Maybe passivity is a receiving. Maybe passivity is a womb. Maybe passivity is a house with two doors. And when something comes in that house in the front door that you don't like, you allow it to, or you nudge it out of the back door, help it go out the back door a little bit. Maybe that's passivity. But the notion that doing what one wants exactly as how one wants to do it, that's passivity, it seems to me, not activity. And we have different ways of explaining this. The Tao, um, the course of a river. There's certain expressions that are so idiomatic, I don't feel like using them because they get into this translation, which I don't want. But it's to be lived with.
So I find that statement to be incredibly powerful in that. So it's been approximately 2 years now since I quit my job. And I walked into my boss's office and said, Carl, I admire you so much. I want to be like you, but I can't be like you if I work for you. So I gotta go,
Mm-hmm.
to do my own thing, which is this. And the times when I feel the very best about the order of chaos and everything that I'm doing, or when I'm doing what I want to do, how I want to do it. And then I get excited, which leads me to think of it to it connects in my mind to a teaching from one of my favorite kind of out there trance channelers, which is Bashar, right? Which I'm not uh that's a whole other conversation. But I like a lot of the stuff he says, and one of those is just to follow your excitement. And I find that whenever I'm not doing that, when I'm not really excited what I'm doing, I don't want to do it at all. I would rather do
Mm-hmm.
anything than do what feels like work to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when I'm writing, when I'm creating, I taught myself to draw for my own book. And like when I'm doing stuff like that, I get so lost in the fun of doing it that I was drawing a tarot card yesterday. I decided I was gonna maybe create a tarot deck, and I started working on the first image, and I worked on
Yeah.
it for 4 hours, and it felt like 10 minutes had passed, and I was just
Yeah.
sitting there, pen and
Remarkable.
paper, because it didn't feel like work, it didn't feel hard, it was just exciting, it was fun, and really connected to me. I'm doing what I did want to do, how I want to do it. Now there was this little voice coming up in the back of my head every once in a while, because I did have some awareness of time saying, you've got chores to do, you've got stuff to do, you got to do this, you got to do that, right? And every time that little voice would come up, I'd be like, yeah, but I'm having fun right now. Like, back off, like go, you
Mm-hmm.
know what I mean? And and so I did. I created. It's not done yet, but I have a really good idea now of what my tarot deck might look like, and I have the first card. And at the end of the day, I feel like this was so worth it. Yeah, I put
Mm-hmm.
off taking out the garbage. Yeah, I put off doing the dishes, but it was fine because I created something that now I'm excited about. That gets me excited about the other things I'm going to create. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
so I feel that your message, or the message that I took from that statement, was this is the way to around that constant feeling of, oh, I've got so much stuff to do. If you can find the right time and place to do those things, and so that they're propelling you towards what you're excited about. And I'm
Yeah.
not saying put the dishes off for 6 months because you're not excited about it. That's not going to help you. But don't obfuscate your excitement for those little annoying things, maybe, or there's so many ways to talk about this, but that's how I experienced it.
Mm-hmm. It's it's a great happiness. It's a great joy when you are able to engage in that thing that just involves your whole self, your thinking, physical, emotional center, and time bends, time vanishes. And of course, I'm aware that there are some people for whom that's not possible, and that that's a terrible suffering and a terrible sorrow. But for those people, and for all of us, I counsel in the book from the very beginning, know your wish, know your wish. Don't be concerned for now as to whether it's actionable. That question and those questions related to that will come, and they will have their day and they will have their place. But for now, know that wish, and along with it, other attendant likes and dislikes. Be aware of it. That's a means around the false self. That's a even a hammer to the false self. Know that wish. David Lynch used to say that an artist has to have his or her workshop at the ready. If you're a painter, you got to have your paints out, you got to have your canvases out, you got to be ready to roll. And and that's what the artist's life is. I think he was adapting that idea from a painter, Henri Nguyen, if I'm remembering the name. But in any case, David was very adamant on that point that the artist had to have his workshop at the ready. And if you don't, there's no greater sorrow than losing an idea that you weren't able to act on. And so as a writer, I'm fortunate that my workshop, which is very spare, is at the ready. But not everybody can do that. And I really, really recognize that not everybody can have that workshop at the ready. But know the wish. Know the wish. And with the knowing can come a vow and can come an awareness, and other things may come that maybe over time will alter physical circumstances. But to not know is the great sorrow.
I agree. I'm going to try to make sure again that I understand what you're saying correctly and kind of use my own verbiage here to make sure I get it, because this is one of the things that I think about within how do we do magic, right? So I prescribe to, well, I mostly, I mean, I don't know for one thing, right? I put a cosmology, not cosmology, but like a theory forth in my book about how this might work, but I don't know. But I do like the idea that we live in what's called a block universe. And that means that all potential futures already exist. And this is what I love about your term selecting, is that you really just need to aim yourself. You need to pick which one of those futures you want and aim yourself at it. And if you don't do that, you're not going to get there. And that's really all there is to it. Not all there is to it, but a huge part of what you need to do in order to achieve the future that you want is to know what future you want. You have to have a good idea of exactly where you want to go, or else how are you going to get there?
I agree. And I was just thinking as you were saying that, and I've critiqued some of this, social scientists will come up with studies demonstrating that possessing goals actually is a deflection from accomplishment. And these studies, which I'm sure some of your listeners have read in headline form from time to time or heard about in a meme or a social media posting from time to time, are, in my estimation, egregiously flawed. The
Yeah.
social sciences detests the self-help project because the self-help project violates the politics and cultural outlook dominant in the social sciences insofar as it designates possibilities for the wage earning person, for the working person, which is who I am and who I write to,
Yep.
that violate these psychologized notions of what role the wage earning or working person is supposed to play in life. It's a means of reducing, objectifying, and talking down to wage earning people that most people
Mhm.
in the social sciences neither know nor encounter outside of beneficent studies conducted within clinical settings that almost invariably produce findings in league with the culture and political outlook of the academic social sciences, in which the self-help project, the positive thinking project, the power of intention is considered magical thinking, confirmation
Right.
bias, maladies which never seem to plague the people conducting the experiments who are proud of their methodology, the same methodology that within several years will get overturned round robin, which is what keeps the social science journals, by and large, in business, paid for by Mr. and Mrs. Taxpayer. And these studies that say, I critique some of them in my book, Cosmic Habit Force. I critique some of them in an article that's free on Substack called Question Authorities. They are egregiously poorly structured when the structure is even rendered transparent. How good do you think your average graduate student in the social sciences is as a motivational coach at helping you, the subject, set, abide, describe, and follow up on your goals? I have my questions about that, having spent dedicated time in both worlds, social sciences, mainstream media that reports on these things, and the culture of search. And my experience in the culture of search, and speaking from my perspective as somebody who has dedicated a lot of years and a lot of experience to scrutinizing, questioning, and practicing such methods, is that the power of intent, a goal-oriented approach, whether psychological, whether metaphysical, or some admixture of both, is valid, right, and necessary, in as much as concentration in nature is necessary and is the only thing that produces cycles or force or seasonal changes or growth, if any, is going to occur at all. And the false self is also that self that gets dictated to by these apparatuses that we have not made, that we are not part of, that tells us what we're experiencing outside of our own pragmatism of survival, our own experience. I trust a sailor to describe the seas to me.
It's interesting as you're talking about this. I'm thinking about there's the false self of the individual, and then there's also a false collective self, right? There's a false self of humanity, of nations, or of even small groups of people, right? So we are living in the most bizarre time frame in human history, and the one and only teeny tiny slice of human history where we collectively, not just for example, the entire nation of entire other countries that have different spiritualities than we do, but here in the West, let's say, on this continent, we basically collectively been like, nah, that's not real, right? I'm going to ignore everything that my senses tell me about how my thoughts and feelings interact with reality, and say that that's not real. That's ghosts aren't real, psychic stuff isn't real, magic's not real, and all of these things. Whereas the rest of human history, not only do we acknowledge this, but culture is based on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
It is
Sure.
the centerpiece of culture. If you look at Sumeria or any of our ancient cultures, the spirituality and the magic of those cultures were the linchpin of the culture, and we don't have that. We've lost that. Ritual is the linchpin of culture, and we've lost that entirely, right? Like we have no rituals. We have fucking birthday candles. Like that's like all we've got left, and it's so sad. And so we've just gotten rid of all of these things that held us together, and it's bizarre. And we need. So my point is, I think that there's this false idea that comes from your idea of the false self. It's the same thing that we've been conditioned to think these things aren't real, and so people who, let's say, adamantly say, I've never heard a good argument against astrology, for example. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
People who argue against astrology know nothing about astrology, and they refuse to learn anything about astrology because to them, astrology is absolutely not real because it scares them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
and it scares them because they have a false idea of what it is. They think it means they don't have free will or something to that
Yes.
effect, right? Which is not accurate if you actually learn astrology. Um, but same thing with magic, right? This idea of like magical thinking being this
Mm-hmm.
negative, bad thing, that is just self-sabotage. Like the
Yeah.
worst kind of self-sabotage, because of course you need to cultivate your mind to orient itself towards what you want, what else would we do, right? Otherwise, it's like just we're just here for survival.
Well, these things are funneled, as I was alluding, from the political and cultural outlook of
Yes.
the social sciences, which is deeply colored by concepts of ardent materialism and economics, and disparages anything that goes outside of those things and the historic or psychologized roles that whomever the elected agent of social change is supposed to play within those frameworks. And the self-help project, since its initiation in a somewhat formalized or identifiable way in, say, the mid to late 19th century and extending obviously into ours, is considered to be a blinding distraction from what social roles we're supposed to play. And within cognitive psychology, there's a unique form of ideological skepticism towards, say, astrology, religion, ESP, prayer, magic, any kind of expressions of or seeking of relationship with some extra physical principle in life, because in their defense, cognitive psychologists spend a lot of time studying how people self-deceive, and that's reasonable. But then
Mhm.
an entire field, an academic field called parapsychology, recognizing and acknowledging of that self-deception, structures a nearly a century of impeccably designed, juried, vetted, replicated experiments, and they deny by which I mean ideological critics deny the replication, which is magical thinking. They deny the airtightness of the experiments, which is confirmation bias of their own. Because these experiments cut against what they have dedicated their own siloed research to, which is demonstrating the manner in which we cognitively fool ourselves. And of course, we do cognitively fool ourselves, but to use that as an excessively broad brush, to use an oven mitt where a surgical glove is necessary, is to deny that the search, something they don't even understand, can even exist. So everything from Lao Tzu to Jesus Christ to Sylvia Plath is nothing but confirmation bias. There's no reason for me to believe that. The universality of understanding that emanates from the Bhagavad Gita, or that emanates from the Tao Te Ching, or that emanates from the Beatitudes, or that emanates from the Dhammapada, or the millennia long retention of some form of astrology, differing in the East than it does in the West. The notion of workability as a primary agent commanding people's attention to these works, it doesn't even occur to them. It doesn't even occur to them that there's utility present, and that that utility is the reason for the retention of these works, whereas there's all kinds of things from antiquity that have no retention because they lack utility. And the quest to disavow utility when it doesn't fit into cultural or political or social attitudes, quite frankly, is why the social sciences are deemed the soft sciences, because they don't have laws, because they're degree, to a degree, an expression of preference.
Yeah. I, that idea of confirmation bias too, at least, in my worldview, because I believe that the world as we experience it is very much shaped by psychic forces. Confirmation bias can become, it's easy to see how confirmation bias becomes factual to some, right? And also that there's a great many people who are incapable of distinguishing a belief from a fact,
Mm-hmm.
right? And you know,
Right.
I think there's value in that, to be honest. So one of the things, as I practiced chaos magic for a long time before I developed chaos witchcraft, because I realized I had some disagreements with Pete Carroll, and we were going off in these different directions. But in chaos magic, in proper chaos magic, belief is used as a tool. And when I first discovered that and thought about it, I thought, oh my gosh, your beliefs are things you can shape. They're things that are malleable. And it had never occurred to me the first time I read Liber Null, and I was in my 30s. So then the next thing that occurred to me was like, well, how many other people has this never occurred to? That
Mhm.
there's a difference between a belief and a fact, right? And that they're, I would say, equally valuable facts. What makes a fact, right? In some ways, you can prove something, you can experiment with it, you can demonstrate it. For gravity, there's a fact about gravity, even though we don't know how it works exactly. Um, but with belief, it has the same weight, it has the same effect on our psyche, and yet it's a choice. It's a subconscious choice, but there's a choice involved, right? And so we have this ability to choose and to shape our beliefs rather than allowing them to choose and shape us. Same thing with our emotions, right? Now, like you said earlier, we are ruled by our emotions. That's very, very true. But you can also develop a healthy amount of emotional regulation and control. And this is something that adults, I believe, must do, because you don't want to be dealing with a 3-year-old in a 30-year-old body. Some emotional regulation is very, very important. And so these are all choices that we make, and they shape the way that the world functions. But the hard sciences, you could say, completely have to ignore all of that malleability of belief and fact and demonstration. And like we were saying earlier, one of the reasons you can't, or it's very difficult to test things like ESP or psychic phenomena in a laboratory, is that having success in the experiment one time develops an expectation that will alter the success of the experiment the second time. But that's not how, any other kind of science works.
Well, I think the Western scientific model, which has obviously brought us many, many wonderful things, is methodological replication.
Yeah.
And the danger zone that we get into, which fuels untoward, uninformed debates, is when rationalism is used as content or conclusion versus process. Rationalism is process. So it's an if then reasoning, it's an attempt to not only repeat method, but to isolate factors. Within rationalism, there is a very just and warranted debate over correlation versus causation, which is actually a debate that goes back to some of the earliest Western expressions of astrology, for that matter.
Mm-hmm.
One should be haunted by the correlation causation question. It's a big philosophical dark side of the moon in a lot of our debates, and this is recognized within physics, and hence within engineering, within physics, within medicine, within chemistry. In my personal experience, and according to survey results that I've seen, I think I talk about some of this in my book Modern Occultism, there's actually a greater opening to the very subjects that you or I are discussing than there is within the so-called soft sciences. And that deserves some attention. That may have something to do with what I was referencing earlier about the study of how we fool ourselves. But regardless, methodological replication has a great place in our world. It goes back to Aristotle, and it's very valuable. It's responsible for the very machines that allow us to have this digitally reproduced conversation right now.
Yeah.
But it mustn't become misunderstood as outcome. It's method.
Right, and this is the conundrum that we're in with the sciences when it comes to quantum physics, is that the same rules no longer apply, right? We have
Mhm.
this entire set of rules called the Standard Model that applies to Newtonian physics, to the physicality of the physical world. But once we go subatomic, once we get down into the quantum level, those rules no longer apply. And I think that we
Right.
need to develop an entirely new set of rules for the unseen. And this is the great scientific revelation that I think is coming. Now, there's a quote that's often attributed to Nikola Tesla, but there are so many quotes attributed to Nikola Tesla that I'm not going to say that he definitely said this one, but it applies. and that is, that he said something to the effect of, "We'll make more progress in a few years than we did in a great many years once we start to study the invisible aspects of reality." Right? And he said it quite a bit differently if he did say it, but I think that's very true. You know, there's so much going on that we can't see, that we can't measure, that we cannot interact with in a physical way. Primarily the mind, right, which is the thing that drives all of us, the reason we're having conversation right now. But you can't show me your mind, and it's not your brain, right? And there's a whole argument to be made there. But when it comes to like correlation and causation, to me, the answer is it's both, and that's rather obvious.
Hmm. Well, the concept of the arrow of time, which at one point
Mhm.
was considered sacrosanct and was considered behind the law of entropy, behind the so-called second law of thermodynamics, which basically holds that you can't unbreak an egg. That concept belongs to classical but not quantum physics, in which time is a multiverse phenomena, so to speak.
Mhm.
And this is going to enter the human situation more fully, I think, when quantum computing is exposed to the public, where the speeds with which problems are solved are so fantastical that they violate accepted scales of time. They violate accepted scales of how much time this undefinable thing, which is really a measurement of time, which is still undefined,
Mhm.
how much time there even exists to solve a problem. So I think that we're moving to a place, especially when the public starts to get exposed to quantum computing more, in which concepts of linear time are going to seem as we know them to be, as things that are experiences but not absolutes.
I try so hard, Mitch, to not make assertions because I don't know anything, right? Like I don't know anything about anything. That's the way that I like to view myself, right? Because I think that one of the great mistakes or or even I would go so far as to say, hmm, something spiritual teachers tend to do that I don't appreciate personally. Something I appreciate that you don't do is to claim to know the ultimate truth, that one I know the secrets, I've got it all right and everyone else is wrong. That kind of thinking, which I don't appreciate. But in my theory of how this all works, time is an aspect of this particular reality that we find ourselves existing in most of the time, whereas your mind exists elsewhere. Your body exists here. Your body experiences time. We age. But the future and the past, from the physical perspective, can only exist in your mind, right? Which is not bound by time at all. Your mind can time travel all at once. I can remember and I can envision, right? These things are not, they're traveling forward and backward in time. That is an extra dimensional effect. So I was trying to explain this to my 10-year-old the other day. And I said, like what? Watch. So we're watching a YouTube video together. And I said, watch this, right? I can rewind it. I can fast forward it. I can rewind it. I can fast forward it. I believe that on the level of the mind, we can do this as well, right? We don't experience it in physicality, but it's a property of an extra dimension. So just like an extra dimensional being may look at our reality the same way that we look at a YouTube video, where we can just fast forward and rewind and pause it and whatever we want to do. Time becomes very, very malleable in that sense. But here in this dimension, in the third dimension, then we are bound by the phenomenon of space time, as it were.
We experience a lot of things as mental ideas. Linearity is one of them. Justice itself, in a certain sense, may be one of them, insofar as karma in Vedic philosophy and classical Vedic philosophy is a very impersonal force. It's a force that plays out over a vast, vast arc of time. And my concept of what justice is might be blinkered by my inability to see with perspective if one thinks from the framework of the classical Vedic perspective, which I'm not necessarily saying is altogether right or to be universally applied, but it we grow so accustomed, for example, to using concepts like karma or Western adaptations of karma as this visible cause and effect, and it may be no such thing. It may play out over vast periods of time. So there too, as with time, is something that I might have a mental experience of, and it might not be reality.
Yeah. And that question of what is real, that can, you can lose yourself in that question very easily.
Mhm.
So sorry to kind of suddenly switch gears, but there's something on my mind this whole time that I really wanted to ask you about. And I'm not sure if it appears in the book, but it's actually from a post you made on Instagram.
Mhm.
And that you said that after writing the book, you realized what you had written was I guess, a manifesto, as it were, of the left hand path.
Mhm.
And I thought, absolutely. Now I've got a whole section in my book about how I'm done with that dichotomy of right and left hand path. And the reason is that no one gets it right. It's become a cartoon of itself. It's become this kind of caricature of, the over here you've got the it's just I see delusion in both of these camps, and so I refuse to join one. But I think that your book, I think that Esoterica really is an exposition on the left hand path in a way that is not a cartoon. It's not a character. It is a philosophical standpoint. So I want to say thank you for kind of bringing that back for one thing and showing it what it really is and what does that mean to you. But also, I just wanted to express that one of the things that I appreciate most about you and about your work is that your identity seems to be uniquely your own. You don't show up wearing a Hawaiian shirt with dreadlocks and everything has to be love and light, and you don't show up the opposite way either, which is these two cartoonish things I see happening within the realm of spirituality all the time, right?
Mhm.
So I guess my question is, how did you avoid getting pulled in one of those two directions? Did you realize, was there at any point when you felt you're being pulled in one of these two directions? And what does the left hand path mean to you?
Well, the left-hand path, of course, has its roots in in the Vedas, in
Mhm.
Buddhism, in Tantrism. There's talk of the left-hand path of attainment,
Right.
which pertains to cities and different powers that might emerge from the body, the mind, the
Hmm.
emotions. I use the left-hand path as a term in modern parlance in a more colloquial way, in which it's been adapted in the West, probably going back to the description offered by Madame H.P. Blavatsky in her book, The Secret Doctrine. She, by the way, had a very fine understanding of classical Vedism and could hold
Hmm.
forth on karma and questions of eternal recurrence in ways much closer to the classical view than to the adaptations. Although her view of the left-hand path, I think with some justification, was more adapted towards the West. I see it in the simplest of terms as a philosophical standpoint from the perspective of my will be done versus thy will be done. It's a more protean, more Promethean
Hmm.
aspect, an outlook that emphasizes self expression, abiding, say, versus forgiveness, agentic power to the individual, a kind of protean self creation. I identify with it very, very deeply. I identify with it from various strands and directions, including expressions of what might be considered left hand philosophy in early Abrahamic traditions, which have gotten layered over and rendered almost recognizable due to millennia of conditioning.
Right.
And I find it to be, frankly, a refreshing drink of water because of what I was saying at the beginning of our exchange, which is this terrible conformity based habit that we get locked into of perfuming or preening our wishes, which may not only not require any of that, but doing so may be violative of something that doesn't require any self justification. I've spoken of karma. I believe very deeply in reciprocity. I believe very deeply in relationship. I have nothing like a go it alone approach to life. So if people associate that with the left hand path, I think that's just kind of an add on that comes from aspects of our culture that I think contribute to this sense of the false self, which is this kind of framing with a casualness that conformity and lack of verification tends to promote and award gold stars for. And I find the left-hand path for me very dynamic, very challenging. The book explores, takes a deep dive in at least two chapters, but probably others, into left-hand philosophy. And as you were rightly saying, I didn't intend to write a manifesto of the left-hand path, but it occurred to me, looking back, that to some degree, that's what the book may be.
When I talk about the left hand and right hand path being these things that I just no longer care to discuss, like I said, it's because of this caricature that they've become. And you really cut through that, because to me, if we're going to talk about it, let's talk about what they really are. They come down to the idea of, and this is another false dichotomy, I believe, service to self versus, which is the wrong term, right, to put there, versus service to others. Whereas my standpoint is service to self and then service to others, right? I have no desire within me to hoard anything. I have a great desire to be massively successful, and then I want to do good things with my success, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's that. So one of the core philosophical standpoints of the left hand path to me is the cultivation of desire, which we could be seen as antithetical to this idea of, well, so you should, everything you should do should be for others, which is absurd, because then if you do everything in life for others, you yourself become a burden on others, because other people have to take care of you because you're not taking care of yourself. Right.
Well, it's just a fantasy. Yeah, it's just
Yeah.
if people will tell me I'm all about service, and as soon as I hear that, I have to reach for the shiv that is somewhere been lodged in my back. It's never failed, and
Yep.
people who talk the prettiest tend to have the sharpest shivs at the ready.
Yep.
And I'm just not interested in that idiom. I'm interested in conduct. Has a
Yeah.
person changed a diaper? Has a person sat up all night with a sick child, as I have? I support children and households and other people. I do so with money, not with
Yep.
pretty words and thoughts and prayers. Money and time are what we have to give to other people. I don't give them to humanity. I give them to the small circle of people I love, authentically,
Yes.
empirically, tactilely, really. And so I couldn't be less interested in hearing someone's pretty songs about uh, service or meaning, or how their perfumed wishes are going to make the world better. I I think that there's a great inexactitude, casualness, and self-positioning with regard to all that stuff. Um, it's 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 anesthetizing oneself to a very great extent, and every religious tradition says this.
Mhm.
I'll quote it from a book of the Talmud: "Beware the man who bespeaks his own virtue."
Yep. Yeah, it's so true, and it's something that I see so frequently within people who otherwise I think genuinely, and this goes back to the idea we were talking about in the beginning of the conversation, where if you're told what enlightenment is, you're never going to find it. And I have no idea what enlightenment is. I think it has something to do with laughter and something to do with empathy. That's as close as I can get, right? But there's a lot of people out there who just they get on this spiritual journey, and in the beginning you can see it's very authentic, but then they will latch on to aesthetics and um groups of people and all these other things that I call them ego traps, right? And it's basically, I would say, beware of any spiritual teacher that is telling you that you're so extra special. You know, you're the chosen one, or any such nonsense, right? Or makes themselves out to be extra special. I'm the guru, right? I'm the fucking, I hate guru culture
Well, beware the
because
student who excessively praises the teacher, because the
yeah,
student who
yeah.
does that sees himself as an apostle.
Ooh, that's a good one. I had not thought about that. Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, I totally agree. I just think that like I said, I think that enlightenment is very deeply connected to empathy.
Mhm.
And that if we want to really truly make the world a better place, then we have to proliferate empathy in a way that works, right? Which is by demonstration. And you cannot demonstrate anything to anybody if you don't have the means to do so, right? You cannot be an example of charity or of empathy or of this if you cannot pay your own bills and take good care of yourself first, right? So you have to have you have to cultivate desire for your own well-being, and that there's nothing wrong with this at all, and that then you can hopefully do good things with what you have. But again, it's not about saving the world. We do this one person at a time. Take care of yourself, your children, your immediate family, if you want to, or if you get past that point in terms of the resources you have, then maybe think about stretching out towards your local community. But this idea of like, oh, I'm going to save the world, just come on, no, you're not. Stop it. You know.
Gurdjieff, you say weak in the world, weak in the work. And you'll find something similar in Confucius. You'll find something similar in Christ. You'll find something similar running through most of the traditions. There's no being trusted with questions of ultimacy until one can water a houseplant.
Yeah, absolutely. So the last thing I want to talk to you about or ask you about, and I haven't gotten to this chapter in the book yet, by the way, but I was looking through it and I wanted to ask you about chapter 10 because it's titled, what was it? If you must fight, fight to win, which I love that, but I haven't actually gotten to the chapter yet. So can you tell me about it?
I examine the martial philosophy of Sun Tzu, and I bring in a lot of other figures and ideas. There are times in life where force or confrontation is unavoidable. I'm hesitating to use the word violence, although there's nothing wrong with using that word. It's just that violence connotes the violation of another person, which can happen physically, which can happen emotionally. It's different from self-defense.
Right.
And so in that chapter, I'm using my best reckoning to address questions of force and self-defense in our world. I detest the adaptation of everything in our spiritual culture into a metaphor, including the word warrior itself. I'm not a warrior. I'm not I'm not a martial artist. And I I don't like the way that everything is prompted in the direction of translation, living in translation. And so concepts of a peaceful warrior or a spiritual warrior or adapting management secrets from Sun Tzu's Art of War. Sun Tzu's Art of War is about killing the enemy.
Yeah.
That's why the great Master Sun wrote the book. And it's probably one of the most widely read and retained works of philosophy in human history, East or West. And so I'm making an effort to distill lessons from that chapter, which invariably do go towards certain facets of life. But I try to be very clear that whatever lessons I'm able to derive from this book as a 21st century man who is not a warrior, what were the ancients? What were our primeval ancestors whose work has survived to the 21st century in some adapted form? What were they saying about this facet and element of life? And there's so much to be learned from Master Sun's work. And I try, from my vantage point, with full qualifications, to distill what the individual may be able to use.
Very, very cool. So I've not gotten there, like I was saying, yet in the book, but I'm very excited to. Another thing I wanted to say about the book, and I was recommending to people, one of the great things that you got to do was you get to voice your own audiobook, which
Yeah.
I think is so crucial, especially on a book of philosophy, because to hear it in someone else's voice just does not have the same impact at all, right? Because you can't hear the tonality is just as almost, if not just as important as the words, right? And a separate voice actor will not be totally unable to deliver it precisely.
Yeah, I was very grateful to be able to do it. My first book,
Mhm.
Occult America, when it came out in 2009, I wanted to do the narration, but I just didn't have the clout at that time, nor did I have a structure around me where um, anyone was able or willing to push it through. So an actor did it. And recently, maybe about 18 months ago, in a dream come true, I got to go back into the studio and narrate a re-released version of the Occult America audiobook, which was put out by Penguin Random House Audio, and I was very grateful. It was really a dream come true. That that was on a list of wishes of work that I wanted to revisit. So being able to narrate my own books, as I almost always do, is very
Mhm.
meaningful to me.
Yeah, it makes such a huge difference. Um, and I'm grateful that you got to do that also. And also it's very, very cool that you got your wish. So I guess speaking of wishes, and this is my last question before we've got to run. I've got so much to do today. What did you take? Because I know that you put this book out and it's for the world, and the world hopefully is going to get a lot out of it. I know that I'm getting a lot of out of it. I know that everyone who reads it is going to extract something that was deeply meaningful to them. But what did you discover for yourself that was deeply meaningful? I guess if you had to pick one thing.
I certainly discovered the presence of debt in our lives, broadly defined. Debt means money, but debt means much more than money. And I'm very astringent in the book, and I'm tough-minded at times in the book, and I think that that shoulders me with a certain degree of debt. And sometimes, apropos of what we were discussing about time and the fact that there is not ultimacy behind our linear conceptions of time, I may have paid that debt in advance, especially in terms of certain experiences I've had just prior to the book's release. And I think that life is debt. Life, it requires the payment of debt. And that's not some gloomy thing. A good turning of events could reach a person, and that turning of events may have something to do with the fact that there's some debt that has already been paid, which is why I think we mustn't be too quick to damn suffering that we've experienced. There may be a kind of payment in that. Sometimes these things maybe generational. Sometimes they may be invisible in the way that a forest is emergent from a network of roots that we can't see. And so I got to thinking about debt a lot, and one mustn't be afraid of it. It's just an aspect of life.
I agree. Yeah. And, back to what we were saying at the beginning, the negative experiences that you have in life, if you can choose to look at them as being valuable, right, I think it alleviates maybe not some of the debt or payment per se, but it alleviates some of the weight that you feel from these events, things that are very,
Mm-hmm.
very hard that we go through. So it's something that I struggled with for a lot of my life because I lost my father at an early age, was feeling like, well, now the world owes me something,
Mm-hmm.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
now I look at it and think, okay, well, sort of, because that event is why I'm here. It was the exploration of death and what's beyond death that became this huge focus in my life. So without that loss, I would not have found the search at all.
I hear that. And the things that we've suffered, we wouldn't want to repeat them. We wouldn't want to go through them again, but they are very often the things that have created the part of ourselves that are most refined.
Yeah,
And life is pendulous. And with that debt may come something valuable.
absolutely. All right, Mitch. Well, thank you very much for being on the show again. I love talking to you. The book is fantastic. I
Thank
highly
you.
recommend everyone check it out. There will be a link in the description. And is there anything else you wanted to plug before we go?
I wanted to give a shout out to the artist, the fine artist John Newsom, who did the cover illustration of Esoterica, which we were displaying in its glorious full size just the other night at a launch event. It's such an honor to be working with John. And there's a page at the back of the book called About the Cover, where, in brief, I go into some of the symbolism, some of which is deepening for me with the passage of time. And John Newsom is, of course, the husband to one of your close friends, students, collaborators, Cassie
Mhm.
Newsom, John's wife, and it's a wonderful connection to have to you that we didn't even know about until a few days ago.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. That was a shock.
the author
Um,
photo on the back is taken by American master Sante D'Orazio. So
mm.
John is to be in the presence of collaborators to whom I really look up, and I'm very grateful.
Yeah, the cover art is amazing. I mean, I was staring at it for a minute the other day, and I think I ate two weed gummies and I just like looked at it. It's just
Hmm.
they kind
I
of like
did.
got lost in it and all the potential. So I haven't read the end yet, but the potential symbolism even is obvious and it's there and it's very, very cool. It's very detailed, very you also. I think they captured the
Mhm.
essence of like of Mitch Horowitz and of the book and of the themes. It's fantastic. I think that good art makes a good book 10 times better. It it adds something, it adds that punch, that like if you're listening to music that's got like a great beat but not enough bass and you're like, I wish it were there. Art does that for words in the same way. So yeah, very, very cool. Everything, like I said, will be linked. And Mitch, thank you for being here. And that's it. So bye everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate it.